The president today promising gun control. The problem is, it is a promise he has made before and broken.
We have to have meaningful background checks. We need meaningful background checks so that sick people don't get guns.
Okay, so today, you heard him, President Trump used the word meaningful 17 times. 17 times he used the word meaningful when talking about background checks. But if he means what he says, then he can take a stand, right? He could write an executive order now. He could let the NRA and some in the GOP fight him. He could take it to court. He could lose, but he could stand. So tonight, Trump has a big choice to make, whether or not to be a president of his word, because here are his words 18 months ago after the Parkland mass shooting.
We're going to do very strong background checks. Very strong. We're going to do background checks.
Again, that was nearly 18 months ago, and he has done nothing since then on background checks. So his lack of action, his broken promise, is actually odd for at least one really important reason, and that is a reason the president knows. Here he is again today.
On background checks, we have tremendous support for really common sense, sensible, important background checks.
He is right. The American people, a majority of Democrats and Republicans, support background checks, meaningful ones. Quinnipiac poll from March found 86% of voters support the background check bill that already passed the House. That is a tremendous number. So you would think that Trump would, knowing that, even have more reason to step up and take action. But instead, today he punted. He said, I called Mitch McConnell.
I spoke to Mitch McConnell yesterday. He's totally on board. He said, I've been waiting for your call. He is totally on board.
Okay, Mitch McConnell is not totally on board, and Donald Trump knows it. He didn't call the Senate back in session. He definitely has not said he is for background checks. In fact, if he were for background checks, he could have voted on that bill that 86% of Americans support, but he didn't. He has refused to bring it to the Senate floor for months. In fact, all he has said since these latest horrific shootings was this yesterday.
There has to be a bipartisan discussion here of what we can agree on.
If that's taking a meaningful stand. So again, the buck stops with President Trump. He can take McConnell on.
I can tell you there's tremendous goodwill for meaningful, I'm talking about meaningful, add that word, meaningful background checks so that sick and demented people don't carry around guns.
Okay. So, President Trump, is he going to keep his word, or will he make meaningful become a meaningless word?
There are lots of reasons why people voted Brexit, but many of them are covered by one word: sovereignty. Brexiteers don't like to share it, from how many fish you can catch to who gets to live here and which court ultimately has the final say over British citizens. Many Brits get pretty cranky at the idea of having to follow rules and regulations set in Brussels, often by people they haven't voted for.
3 years after Britain voted to leave the European Union, the future of Brexit is still uncertain. The deadline to leave is now the 31st of October. And the new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has taken a harder line than his predecessor, stating that Britain will leave on that date, do or die. Johnson has said he intends to negotiate a new deal with the European Union, which removes the Northern Ireland backstop, the position of last resort to protect against a hard border, which would mean Britain retains a close relationship with the EU indefinitely. He also wants to change the political declaration. But time is running out, and the EU has stood firm on its refusal to reopen the existing withdrawal agreement. It's been suggested that Johnson could suspend Parliament to effect a no deal, but Parliament has demonstrated its will to stop a no-deal Brexit.
Well, it's no secret that the EU regrets Brexit and sees it as a historic mistake. If a country as large and as powerful as the United Kingdom wants to leave a club in which it helps shape the single market and benefits from security cooperation, among many other things, what does that say about the club itself? Nothing good. And so from the start, the EU's approach has been damage control.
The British pound has slumped since the UK voted to leave the EU, and it could fall even further in the event of a hard or no-deal Brexit. Now, that may be some good news for tourists hoping for a cheap trip to the UK and for some British businesses which are export-heavy. But it's bad news for many. The cost of living for Brits is rising as imports become more expensive, and it's a similar story for some British businesses which have to import more materials. Plus, all the uncertainty over what the future trading relationship will be between the UK and the EU, well, that's forced some businesses to already hit their contingency plans. Big banks, for example, have already moved some operations from the UK to the EU.
The UK has been in decline for a century. Brexit is a milestone on that downward trajectory. Far from taking back control and turning the UK's fortunes around, it will leave the kingdom's citizens more isolated from allies, alliances and markets. Economic growth will be slower, intelligence sharing curtailed. But it's not as bleak as it sounds. The UK still has clout. It remains one of the 5 permanent members of the world's most powerful diplomatic body, the UN Security Council. Change won't be overnight, but the future as it comes will depend more on the billions of people beyond its borders than in the past.
DEF CON Voting Village is the only third-party independent assessment team of voting machines, as far as we know, in the entire world. So people come here to really kick the wheels, figure out exactly how these machines work, what the vulnerabilities are, so we can make more secure elections.
Yeah, there's a million different ways to interact with this thing.
Just kind of exploring like what's going on with printing.
This is the AccuVote TSX. It's used in 18 different states, 8 of which are swing states. It's going to start rebooting, and you're going to see that it's having trouble rebooting because there's no card reader. And now you have full admin access on this machine. So you can disrupt the election, you can disrupt people's confidence in the election. When you think about admin access, you can think about like keys to the castle. When you have admin access, you own the machine. You can get it to do what you want it to do. So you can imagine that being very nefarious.
US elections are so complex that we humans cannot do a manual count. We are dishonest and we are error prone. So we have to use machines, while we know that the machines are hackable. So now the question is, we use the machine and now we verify the results by doing a risk limiting audit, and this is where you know that the machine didn't cheat. But you cannot trust machine as by paper ballot.